4 in 10 Canadians aged 18 to 34 would vote to be American if conversion of assets to USD was guaranteed. Why that particular age group?
Well, if Donald Trump had not won in the United States, Mark Carney would not be prime minister. Every survey now is Canada in its view of the United States. They've moved from kind of an uncomfortable next door neighbor to something that people believe is a threat. About 30% of Albertans say that they would vote for Alberta to become its own country in North America. I'm actually quite concerned about what's going on in Alberta.
43% of Canadians report that they are within $200 or less of not being able to meet their monthly financial obligations.
A couple of more cuts from that knife will bring them down.
Darrell Bricker joins us once more. He is the global CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs, and we'll be discussing Canadian affairs today, as well as how Canada and the U.S. are progressing in the global economic stages. Welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Great to be on, David. Thanks for having me back.
Darrell, we just had Carney's government switch from a minority to a majority government between national elections, which I believe is the first time it's happened in Canadian history. And we'll talk about what that means for Parliament and the implications for legislation. But first, broadly speaking, what is happening with the Canadian and American economies? I'm lumping the two together for now, and we'll talk about Canadian economies in a little bit more detail separately in just a bit. But right now, people are concerned about gas prices, because of gas prices soaring from the war in the Middle East, but they're also concerned about affordability in general, and that predates the war in Iran. Have the living standards in Canada, and to some extent the United States, worsened dramatically since the beginning of March, end of February, based on data that you've seen? Or are we just on the same trajectory that we've always been on since maybe last year?
No, I think what we're seeing is that regardless of what the people who are the experts on the cost of living, who can go out and parse with the expansion of the prices of an ear of corn or whatever, who really know that in detail, the point in this for the public is the perception is reality. And they are experiencing the increase in fuel prices, both directly and indirectly. They're experiencing it when they go to the gas pump, and they're experiencing it when they go to the grocery store. So things that need to travel in order to bring them the goods that they consume every day. So there is a belief at the moment in both the Canadian and the American public that those costs are going up and that this is bad for them personally.
This is an article published by Ipsos, and I'll just read the first paragraph here. More than 40%, so 43% of Canadians report that they are within $200 or less of not being able to meet their monthly financial obligations. This is up 2 points from last quarter. Nearly one-third, 30%, 29% say they already don't earn enough to cover their bills and debt payments. One-third of Canadians surveyed. Women and younger adults remain among the most financially vulnerable. Average finances left at month end have climbed up to a record $1,000, up from $907 last quarter. What's going on right now?
Well, it's exactly what I was just saying. And I know sometimes we get some reaction from people out there saying, oh, people really aren't in this type of a situation. I mean, they could sell things, they could do other things and get themselves on track. Or maybe if they took a closer look at their bank account or their investments, they'd realize it's not as bad as they think it is. But it doesn't matter. This is how they feel. They feel like they're on a knife's edge when it comes to their financial situation, and they feel like a couple of more cuts from that knife will bring them down. So they're living with this in their day-to-day lives. They're living with this in their dreams or nightmares. It's something that is overcast. It's like the weather. It's overcast in like it would be in Vancouver, although it looks a little sunnier today. But it's like it's overcast, and it's a pall on how people are thinking right now. And it also leaks into things, for example, like whether or not they're optimistic about the future. They're definitely not. Particularly younger Canadians. Do they think that we're that from an economic perspective that things are getting better or worse for them? They don't feel it's getting better. They feel it's getting worse. Do parents feel that their kids are going to do better than them at the same stage of life today? And the answer is no, they do not. So this sense of forward progress that's related to the economy is really held back and really defined by this really immediate concern about whether or not next month people will be personally financially viable.
How much of the sentiment is tied to the war in Iran?
Well, I think that the moving up in the index is definitely tied to that. I think it's very much people looking at that, looking, if they're driving, and most Canadians, that's the way that they get to work is they drive. They go to the gas pump and they see it in their face when they look at the price of what they're paying. So it's immediate, it's real, it's personal, and it's here.
Higher oil prices actually positively impact the TSX index, the Toronto Stock Exchange. If you compare the Toronto Stock Exchange to the American S&P 500, it's actually outperformed since last year by a wide margin. I wonder if this feeds into the Canadian economy and to what extent Canadians feel better about their economies versus their U.S. counterparts because Canadian markets are doing better overall.
No, there's a pretty close equivalence between Canadians and Americans right now in terms of their economic optimism. The difference that I would say is that in the United States, they're really taking it out on their national government at the moment, on Donald Trump. He's really taking a lot of personal blame for this, whereas in Canada, Mark Carney isn't taking the same blame. To the extent that people feel that they've got somebody to blame, they're probably also blaming Donald Trump.
Okay. This is Carney's first act after securing a majority government. He's suspending Canada's fuel tax. He said that fuel prices increasing sharply, like we talked about. He's suspending the federal fuel tax from next Monday until Labor Day, September 7th. He called it a responsible temporary measure that will also reduce costs for truckers and businesses. Okay, so that's just one thing. So after securing a majority government, what do you expect the Liberals to be doing in the coming months? What do you think is on top of mind on their plates?
Well, in many ways, it's what the Conservatives are thinking, combined with what Justin Trudeau did, whatever was on that those agendas, whatever that is, the opposite. So, okay. Although on this one, I would expect that if Pierre Poilievre would have won the election and was the prime minister, he would be doing something very similar. So one of the things that is really coming to the fore here with the Carney government is they seem to be better attuned, I would say, to the public opinion environment than their predecessors were. And it's really indicative of what I would say Mark Carney said when he was in Davos and he made that speech that a lot of people are still talking about. You have to deal with the world as it is rather than the world that you'd want it to be. And it seems like he's doing the same thing when it comes to Canada. So he's not using the public policy process to make us eat our broccoli every day on, whatever policy it was that they were excited about in Ottawa. They seem to be more open to the idea that they should be listening to Canadians and maybe leading them in directions that they need to go or want to go, rather than trying to change things as much as the previous government was trying to do.
Before continuing with the video, let's talk about one of the most critical investment trends of 2026. The U.S. depends on foreign sources for the majority of critical minerals used in defense systems, EV batteries, and advanced technology. Washington is now treating this as a national security problem. Executive orders, government equity stakes, billions in institutional capital. The policy shift is documented and it's accelerating. Today's sponsor, the Metals Royalty Company, ticker TMCR on the NASDAQ, was built specifically for this moment. Their anchor asset is a 2% gross overriding royalty on the Nori project, a polymetallic deposit controlled by TMC, the Metals Company, Inc., which targets key battery and defense metals like nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese. That means, through its royalty-based model, TMCR can participate in long-term commodity upside and cash flows while avoiding the heavy capex, operational, and environmental risks tied to building and running mines. The royalty model has a long track record in precious metals. TMCR is applying it to critical minerals where the established players are not yet entrenched. Scan the QR code on the screen here or check out the link in the description to learn more. What other measures can the government take, the Liberal government in this case, to make affordability more of a reality for the average Canadian? Let's put it that way.
Well, you've heard a lot of them. So, for example, the idea that they're going to take action on housing, whether they will or not, I mean, that's the primary thing when people take a look at affordability that they care about. Now, what they do have on their side is that the real estate market's been softening, particularly the rental market has been softening, and for younger people, that's probably a good thing. So they've got some things that are kind of working to their advantage on that. But yes, access to the type of middle class housing that people really say that they want is probably going to be one of the big indicators of whether or not the government's actually making progress. Dealing with day-to-day expenses like groceries, for example, fuel, as the Prime Minister has recently done, and keeping on top of that, probably really smart. But focusing on things that are more related to the daily expenses that Canadians pay, that's what they want to look at. And that includes not just, of course, what they're actually paying, but also the tax part that goes into it.
When you survey Canadians, I mean, what are some of the primary issues that you ask them about right now when it comes to the economy?
Well, one of the things that we usually like to ask, well, we always ask, is what we call top of mind. So what's the most important issue facing the country today? And when you take a look at the top five, they are, number one, affordability, number two, healthcare, number three, housing, number four, immigration, and number five, dealing with the United States. And in many ways, they're very interrelated, but Canadians are able to differentiate among them. So affordability and housing are obviously very interlinked. So access to the housing that they aspire to, Canadians want to see action on that. And then affordability of day-to-day expenses, definitely want to see action on those things. Healthcare, there's a feeling in general in the country these days that the future of publicly paid healthcare is not assured, and the level of service that they feel that they're getting from the healthcare system these days is definitely in decline when we go out and we do surveys. So they're very worried about what the future is going to be, and the experience that they're having right now is not what they feel that they should be having. On immigration, you've seen the government move very aggressively on that. They do believe that the system got out of control. One of the things that's interesting about the immigration issue in Canada, different from the United States and different from many of the countries in Europe where it's a big issue, is that it's not actually about the immigrants themselves. It's more about how the system is being managed and whether it's being managed effectively. Canadians have come to the conclusion that the fact that, in their view, immigration has become out of control, that this is having an effect on those cost of living issues that we talked about. It's having an effect on our healthcare system, and it's also having an effect on the credibility of our immigration system. The consensus that we had across all parties on this issue still remains at the official level, but not necessarily among the voting groups. There are Canadians now who are very concerned about immigration, and that consensus has started to fall apart.
Let's talk about housing, which is something that affects everybody. Housing prices, especially condominiums across the bigger cities like Vancouver, where I'm based, in Toronto, are falling dramatically to the extent that even rent is negotiable downwards, which is something that I haven't really encountered in my entire life here. Tell us what's going on.
Well, the interesting thing about, you know the condo market and how people looked at it as investment opportunities rather than living opportunities, and all the things that are complicated in that, and how the chickens are coming home a bit, I guess, to roost in the market, unfortunately, for the people who invested in it. But the thing about the condos for Canadians, when you go out and you ask them the type of housing that they would like to live in, condos are not at the top of the list for most Canadians. In fact, that's the housing you endure rather than the housing that you want. The housing that you want are generally single-family homes, probably like the one that you grew up in, David. That's what people are looking for. So the condo market, when people now have the option of not returning to downtown because they're forced to by their work, or they are able to commute out further to buy a single family home, or they have reached a point where they can start seeing some possible hope in the housing market. This is all going to work against the condo market. Yes, there are people who are still going to buy condos, probably not the young up and comers that the condo makers may have thought that they were building for, but probably people still continuing to think about downsizing, and actually more older people moving into that type of accommodation. But younger people, it's the housing they endure. It's not the housing they aspire to.
That's exactly what's happening to my mother, actually, by the way, personal anecdote. She's considering moving from her single-family home and downsizing to a condo. So that's happening. But what about the population of Canada shrinking overall? You'll recall that last year was the first year in Canadian history where the overall population shrank. And I think part of it may have been due to the fact that immigration, like you said, was cracked down because the natural births in Canada have been declining for quite some time. If the population continues to decline, or at least increase very slowly, stagnate, what does that mean for the housing market?
Well, I think the housing market's going to be very interesting going forward because, it does continue to surprise me that people actually don't know what's happening with Canadian demography. I know we've talked about this before on your show, David, but, our birth rate has collapsed. To simply replace the number of people who are dying in this country every year, we need to have a fertility rate or a birth rate of 2.1. That's every woman in the country during her lifetime having 2 kids as a minimum. And today our birth rate is 1.3. We're almost a whole kid short to just replenish our population. And without immigration, we would probably be tipping into greater population decline than we have now. So the thing that kept the population growing was the fact that we had a very large amount of immigration. In fact, many people would argue too much immigration. So until we get that straightened out, we're going to see, particularly with the government's crackdown and probably ongoing crackdown on immigration, we're going to see the Canadian population continue to decline because we're just simply not having enough kids. So what does that mean for the housing market? It means a lot of big change. And I don't know that people are really taking it into account and thinking about it. By the way, David, not just unique to Canada, unique on in most of the world, except in places like Africa or maybe the Indian subcontinent and places like that. Most other places are going through a very similar thing. Even places like, interestingly, Latin America. Going through a very similar thing where their fertility rate has collapsed as well.
Well, Canadians have a variable rate as opposed to Americans who mostly go on a 30-year fixed. And so what the Bank of Canada does is really important and really critical. So if you look ahead of the economy and what the Bank of Canada has telegraphed, where do you expect mortgage rates and rates in general to be headed into 2027?
Well, if I had a nickel for every time I think the Canadian central bank has been pretty stable over time. They haven't been making a lot of huge changes and huge movements. I think with the degree of uncertainty that exists in the marketplace, that things will probably remain stable. There's going to be obviously upward pressure in inflation because of the rising costs of things like fuel and groceries and things like we were talking about before. So how they use monetary policy to affect that will be very interesting. But also, given what's happening in the real estate market, maybe there's some potential for some softening of mortgage rates as well, as people are going to be competing more to get business for mortgages. So it's going to be a really interesting mix of different things happening all at the same time. So I think to say that anybody could predict what the Bank of Canada is going to do, say in the next 6 months or the next year, is hard to say, particularly given what's happening in the Middle East right now.
How likely is it? And again, when I'm not asking you to pull out your crystal ball, but in 2022, rates basically doubled for a lot of Canadians. How likely are we going to get that scenario again this year?
If the costs of goods in the country continue to remain high, the transportation of them, but also access to fuel, home heating and all the rest of it, unless there's some considerable relief from the government, we could have an inflation problem again. In fact, when we just did some survey research, I don't know if it's been released yet, and we asked people what's the number one issue facing them today. We've now seen inflation move up into the number one position again, which we haven't seen for a bit of time.
I understand the central bank needs to combat inflation by tightening monetary policy. It just seems counterintuitive for an average person living in any country, Canada or the United States. I happen to be in Canada, that when there is an inflation problem, the government tightens rates and raises rates. It makes it more difficult for the average homeowner to pay their mortgage. That's going to exacerbate the issue of affordability, don't you think?
And yes, and at the same time, it's going to get people to start focusing on what Mark Carney and his government is doing about it. So in the meantime, it's the big orange man south of the border that's causing all of these problems for Canadians.
Okay.
That's their view. That's their view. Okay. And but over time, it's going to start moving on to Mr. Carney.
How do you see Canada and the U.S.'s relationship progressing from here onto the end of Donald Trump's term, which is in 2 years, by the way?
Well, I think, there's a lot of people who are experts on Canada-U.S. relations that have some pretty firm views. I can tell you what Canadians think. Canadians think it is as bad as it could possibly be, but still has the potential to get worse. So when you go out and you survey across the world on people's views of whether or not Canada, the United States is like a trustworthy partner, is doing good things in the world, ranking at the bottom of the 30 countries that we interview in now, either last or second last, every survey now is Canada in its view of the United States. They've moved from kind of an uncomfortable next door neighbor to something that people believe is a threat.
But how much of Donald Trump's policies, tariffs, for example, have actually negatively impacted the Canadian economy?
At this point, what economists will say is we're only, obviously touching the tip of the iceberg on this, because a lot of things are still covered off under the current agreement. But the perception among Canadians is that what's happening in our economy that's negative is being driven by that more than anything else.
Okay,
whether it's true or not is another question.
Why do you think Carney's pivoting to China? Strategically speaking, and just for context for the viewers who may not be caught up with the story, earlier in the year, Carney made a deal with Xi Jinping to import up to 49,000 Chinese EVs to Canada, down and reduce the Chinese EV tariff or Chinese car tariff rate from 100% to 6.1%. In return, China has agreed to buy some soybeans and other farm products, and made it easier for Canadians to apply for a Chinese visa.
Yeah, so he's looking at trade diversification, and the second largest economy in the world is the Chinese economy. And that's why, and you could add up all the European countries, I guess the European Union is probably bigger, but he's been negotiating things there too. And the reason is because the United States, in his view, in the view of his government, has become an unreliable partner. And the only way that you can get under the weight of an unreliable partner is to have other partners. Now, the interesting thing on the Chinese initiative by the Carney government, prior to what Donald Trump did, that would be a very, very difficult thing for any Canadian prime minister to do, because Canadians are actually quite down on China. Election interference, the seizing of our citizens there, the way that they basically play the game, the sense that they actually are an existential military threat to the Western world. All of those things are believed by Canadians. And as a result of that, they're actually quite down on China. But the problem that they have is that out of necessity, they need to consider it. So there's no celebration in Canada about getting closer to China. Mm-hmm. It's basically putting up with it because we don't really have a lot of choice in the minds of Canadians.
Do you think that's going to make relations with the U.S. trading partners even worse?
Well, if Donald Trump and the Republicans can make it a sticking point in the upcoming midterm elections, and they can use it to justify what they do as part of their CUSMA negotiations, I think that there's potential that it could become a leverage point in the U.S. election. The problem, though, is that you've got to really focus on this. And to the extent that people are focused on what's causing the economy to go sideways in the United States, particularly when it comes to things like the cost of daily expenses, including fuel, they have a much easier answer on that one, and it's their president. How
easy would it be to diversify away from the U.S. for imported goods?
Incredibly hard. I mean, the biggest economy in the world, the most powerful country in the world, sits next door to us.
Yeah.
I mean, you can pretend that that's not going to be important, but it's obviously going to be incredibly important. Even before we had free trade with the United States, they were by far our biggest trading partner. I mean, it's just their economic success and size and their military importance make them absolutely critical to Canada's future. So we have to figure it out. There is no international trade agreement that's big enough to offset what we do with the United States.
Is NAFTA pretty much permanently dead then at this point?
Well, the way the Americans are reacting, I mean, it's been dead for a couple of years, right? And so it's not just us, it's also Mexico. So, I mean, they've been pretty arbitrary in the way that they've been dealing with it over the last while. And, I've had the Freedom Day and all the rest of it that's happened in the United States with tariffs. And they become, a very capricious, unpredictable a trading partner, which was something that the NAFTA agreement was supposed to get rid of.
Yeah.
So NAFTA, as it was originally conceived, and the free trade agreement with the United States, as it was originally conceived by Simon Reisman, Michael Wilson, Brian Mulroney, the people who brought it to Canada, was something that would absolutely prevent this and create some reliability in the relationship, and that's not what we have now. So you'd have to say that it's as it was originally conceived, it no longer exists.
Interesting. Well, what does the future of trade look like for Canada? How much of the trade is going to come from the U.S. versus the rest of the world? Do you think? Do you think the nature of the Canadian economy when it comes to trade has been permanently changed?
Well, permanent's a long time. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we'll have to see what happens. I mean, this president's going to be around for another 2 years. So for that period of time, the capricious nature of the relationship and the way the United States has been acting is obviously going to be something that we're all going to be thinking about. But I think what this has really reinforced, or should have reinforced, is what the Canadian economy really is.
Yeah.
And the Canadian economy is really a trading economy based mostly on natural resources and agriculture. Yes, there's manufacturing that's in there. Yes, there's steel. Yes, there's aluminum. Yes, there's cars. But when you take a look, and you don't have to listen to me on this, people who are listening in right now, and I know a lot of people do listen to your podcast, David, but just go take a look any month in the trade statistics between exports from Canada, and you'll see exactly what our economy is driven by. So I think there's probably going to be more recognition that that's what our situation is. And the good part of that, I would say, is that it's actually what the world wants from Canadians. So what we have to sell is what the world needs. So I think we need to get our trade relationship with the United States sorted out, because we're better sources of things for them than maybe even creating it on their own, given the amount of time that it would take to actually create the industries that we fill in for right now, but also the rest of the world. And we can't just rely on the United States. We're going to have to expand our relationships to other places.
Well, this is something that was published in Global News. So a quote from yourself. I think Canadians are hopeful that next year will be better because, quite frankly, it can't get much worse.
Yeah, well, maybe I'd like to have that one back.
This was an article published early January. Now,
Yeah.
Now 7 out of 10. This is the survey you're referring to. 7 out of 10 Canadians said they are fearing a future recession. I mean, aren't we all? Although that number is 4 points lower than what it was 3 years prior. Okay, so that's important. 41% said 2025 made them feel more fearful about their job security. That's 11 points higher than 2022. I think what needs to turn around, like what needs to happen to turn the economy around and make the Canadians a little bit more, I guess, confident in job prospects in the future?
Well, I think the number one thing that has to turn around immediately is that we have to get the situation stabilized in the Middle East. And oil prices have to come down, and people have to feel that that is under control. And that will hopefully get them to even out their anxiety a little bit and get us back to something that looks more familiar to what you're seeing here. So that would be the new normal. So when I was saying that was before the war started. But longer term, I think what Canadians are going to need to see is that some of the things that have been promised by the government, particularly in terms of infrastructure that's supposed to support our economy or enable our economy, particularly our diversified trading economy, that they're actually happening. So they're going to actually have to see evidence of that. And those are the kinds of things that will make them feel more confident. They do watch things like, for example, whether or not interest rates are going up or down. They do watch things like whether or not their neighbors are employed or unemployed. They do watch things like the prices at the grocery store. So those very basic things that happen on your kitchen table and happen in your neighborhood are the things that are going to have to change in order for people to feel more confident. It's the thing about the economy, David, for the average citizen, it's not about what they see in the business news. They don't read the Wall Street Journal. They don't really follow the stock market that much. What they look at is what they're experiencing themselves. So that experience has to change.
Let's talk more about Canadian politics now. According to this Wall Street Journal article, this is quite interesting. Pierre Poilievre's popularity rating has just been sliding. And for more than a year, his party has had a 20-point lead in opinion polls over then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. That is no longer the case. And he's been quoted by some experts as being the most successful, unsuccessful leader in Canadian politics. Why has Poilievre, and by extension the Conservative Party's popularity, been declining even after Carney won the election last year?
Well, I think because people are rallying a little bit to the situation that the prime minister and his party finds themselves in. A big part of it is because of the sense of impending crisis next door to the United States and what we're going to be dealing with in terms of our economy. But also, they believe that they picked the right person. There's no buyer's remorse among most Canadians these days about the prime minister, and you can have some quibbles about the way that he's manufactured his majority rather than won it. But Canadians will tell us they don't like floor crossers, and they do think these people should run in by-elections. But in the end, the ends justify the means. What they want is a stable government that's focused and able to deal with what the threat that we're feeling next door, and they feel that they've got that now. The way I would describe it, David, is it's like we've got a pretty bad hand, and I'll use the poker as the analogy because Donald Trump is always talking about whether people have the cards or they don't. So that's who we're dealing with here. So let's keep it in the realm of playing cards. So they feel like they've got a pretty bad hand. They feel like they're playing against somebody who's pretty determined to beat us. They basically picked the person that they feel would do the best job of playing that bad hand for us. So they're not regretting that. But ultimately, and this actually works for Mark Carney and the Liberals, is they don't actually expect him to win. So they feel they've done everything that they can do. They feel that this is kind of on its way. They don't feel that he's going to really be able to negotiate the kind of deal that will truly replace the current deal and assure our security going into the future, but they don't really feel that there's anybody else who could do a better job. So that's where Mark Carney is right now. And current political circumstances, that's good enough.
So basically, Canadians didn't vote Conservative in the last election because they didn't think that Poilievre and his government could have negotiated a better deal with the Americans than Carney and his government and the Liberals.
Correct.
Do you think that the outcome could have been any different had Poilievre won?
Well, sure, it would have been different, but he would have been facing exactly what the prime minister is facing. He may have moved more aggressively on things like cutting the public service or reducing government spending or doing a few other things, but he would have been boxed in by the same kinds of issues that are going to box in Mark Carney. As I said before, there's no sense of buyer's remorse on Pierre Poilievre among the majority. I mean, conservative voters, yes, maybe there is a little bit, but they do feel it was funny on this one, David. Even 17% of people who voted for the Conservative Party in the last election thought Mark Carney would do a better job with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
That's how universal the feeling is.
It's interesting how, in Canada, we have the sense of national pride that we have to push back on tariffs, and I understand that. If you actually look at what happened post-Liberation Day in April, and I'm not criticizing the Liberal government for making the decisions that they have, but there are some places around the world, some countries and jurisdictions, Taiwan being one of them, where they did not actually impose retaliatory tariffs, and then Trump took tariffs off of Taiwan immediately afterward. And so I wonder if retaliating against the U.S. by imposing tariffs of our own was a mistake. What do you think?
Well, I think, you could argue whether it's a mistake or not, but has it hurt Mark Carney in terms of public opinion? The answer is no.
Yeah, so he did what he thought the Canadian people wanted to do.
Well, I don't have access to his thinking as to why, but I can just show you in the polling results that Canadians, first of all, probably aren't even aware of what you just said.
Right.
And secondly, given where his numbers and how he's riding in the polling right now, it hasn't moved him in the other direction. And in the end, on the rightness or wrongness of political moves in terms of whether it leads to somebody's support or not, it's like the market. Public opinion research polling is like your share price. It tells you what people really think.
Right. Well, what do the public really think right now in terms of what they want the Liberal government to do? In other words, what do the Liberals need to do to stay ahead in the polls?
Start making my life feel like it's getting easier. Help me feel optimistic about the future. make me feel that whatever we end up getting with the United States, that you did the very best that could be done, even if it's not that great. But just and then the other thing I think that Carney's done pretty well is he's moved quickly on things that the previous government. The one of the issues with the previous government is it just wasn't that they picked their spots about when to fight over things. They fought over everything. Anything that anybody said that was critical of what they were doing, any objection to what policies they believed in or what values they had or whatever, they would just fight it to the death. And the public was just so tired of that. It was this idea that, we know better than you. And Mark Carney, as you saw on the gas tax issue, I mean, sure, Justin Trudeau moved on that at the end when it came to home heating fuel in Atlantic Canada. But on things like immigration, I mean, Mark Carney moved right away on cutting back on the public service. He signaled what his intentions were on that. These were all things that the previous government just wouldn't even touch. And it was because you just don't understand why this is, is this kind of condescending attitude. And you can decide whether or not you think that the current government under Mark Carney, even though it's all the same people except basically for one, whether they've just made kind of a communications change or whether it's different. But to this point, Mark Carney seems to be communicating a willingness to be more kind of accepting of different points of view and maybe listening to the public more about what it is that they're concerned about. And this gets back to that Davos speech. I'm not trying to deal with create the world I want. I'm just trying to deal with the world that I find, right? And he seems to be acting more that way, which, by the way, is more of the kind of position that somebody like a Doug Ford would take, or even a Stephen Harper. Kind of an approach, more of a practical, kind of less flamboyant, ideologically flamboyant position on big issues that Canadians are concerned about.
Yeah, let's go back one more time to the prior election. What were one or two critical mistakes that Poilievre made that cost him the election? In other words, if you turned back the clock and just did some things differently, what would those things be?
He didn't, this is going to probably drive people in your comment sections crazy. I'm just going to say this. First of all, everybody's, a lazy boy chair quarterback. Everybody can figure out what they should have done or how they would have run a campaign. Campaigns are difficult things to run. I do not think it was possible for Pierre Poilievre to win that campaign with anything that he did. And the reason was because the campaign became so overshadowed by one specific issue, which he was not well positioned on. And they absolutely the Liberals brought in a leader who was from central casting to deal with these circumstances. So he was not in a position where he could really compete effectively. Now, there would be campaign consultants and other people talking about how great a job that they would do and how they would have pivoted him and how they would have made him good on. If you were looking at on trade, for example, if you were looking at the polling data on that, there was no chance. Like I said, even 17% of conservative voters thought that Carney would do a better job. So generally what happens in an election campaign, David, is that, you want to be well ahead on the most important issue in the campaign, and that's how you win. Well, the most important issue being trade with the U.S. That was what you're referring to? Interestingly enough, it wasn't. The most important issue was actually affordability. And the Conservatives were 4 or 5 points ahead of the Liberals on that. So it was an important issue, and the Conservatives were seen as doing a good job on that. And they spent a whole period of time trying to position on that, and they did it effectively. But what happened was that this one issue was dealing with the United States and free trade, animated a very specific group of voters, which were a combination of some progressive conservatives, sure, but mostly NDP supporters who moved over to the Liberal Party. They were older, they were disproportionately female, slightly more affluent. That group of people were really animated by the trade issue. And they all came together around one particular candidate. And I will remind people who are watching this, because we sometimes forget, particularly now that Mark Carney has a majority, that he only won by 3%. So it wasn't that Poilievre did a horrible job. It's just that this was an election that was not set up for him to win. By the way, if Donald Trump had not won in the United States, Mark Carney would not be prime minister. If Justin Trudeau had stayed on, Pierre Poilievre would still be prime minister. So this was kind of a fluke situation, once in a lifetime thing that he unfortunately fell into. Could he have found a way out of it? Maybe somebody's going to come up with something brilliant that I haven't seen, but it's not obvious to me.
So it's not obvious how they're going to, win the next election. Okay, just finishing off, you mentioned mining, minerals, resources being core to the Canadian economy. Has the current Liberal government made any new initiatives to promote the sector or made it easier to operate in the sector versus the prior Trudeau Liberal government?
To this point, I have not seen anything other than a memorandum of understanding on building a pipeline to Tidewater. In Alberta. I'm sure that there are things going on behind the scenes. They've set up that special project office that's closer to you than it is to me because it's in Calgary. They're trying to set up a system that makes it easier to get projects approved. They've announced a bunch of things that were approved, although people criticize them for the fact that most of them were already well in train or already basically approved anyway. So a bit of communication chicanery on that front. But whether or not they make progress on that, at least they seem to be focused on dealing with it, and we'll see if they do.
Final question. I want to save this one for the last. Is Alberta going to be a separate country by the end of the year? According to your polls, what do people think about the Alberta referendum issue, despite the fact that it's not going through currently? But, what do people think about the issue?
About 30% of Albertans say that they would vote for the country, or for Alberta to become its own country in North America. But I want to be really clear about this. What we're recording here is not actually people thinking that Alberta is ideally suited to be its own country in North America. They're not actually even thinking after the next day, after a successful referendum vote. What they're really saying is, I'm so upset with the way that Canadian federalism is operating these days, and so upset with the fact that the way the Liberal government in Ottawa operates, that I want to express my displeasure about this. So in the election campaign, they certainly expressed their displeasure by voting almost universally for the Conservative Party. But this is another opportunity to do kind of the same thing. The idea that they've actually thought through what that version of an independent country is in Alberta, there's not a lot of strength behind that. But that idea, that emotion, that grievance that they're feeling right now is what's driving it, and could drive it up. And I will just for your listeners, we did a lot of polling around Brexit in the UK all through that period, and I can tell you, a year before, only 30% of people in the UK were supporting Brexit. So I'm actually quite concerned about what's going on in Alberta. And I think that, yes, we're dealing with what's going on in the United States right now and how that's going to affect our economy. But this other thing is going to require a significant amount of attention from the federal government. And so far, I don't think we've seen very much.
By the way, I said that was going to be the final question. I just saw something else. I need to bring this up before we go. Okay, this was a poll you did last year in 2025, early 2025. 2 in 10 Canadians would vote for the province to be American if Quebec, Alberta became independent. Now, the majority of Canadians, when Ipsos polled them, would you want to join the U.S., the majority voted no, but 4 in 10 Canadians aged 18 to 34 would vote to be American if conversion of assets to USD was guaranteed. That is an extraordinarily high number in that age group. Why that particular age group?
Well, it's the point I was making before about whether or not the Canadian promise is paying off for you. And this is a group of people for which it's not. So, and also keep in mind that these are people probably with weaker attachment to Canada. I mean, we can spend a lot of time talking about how schools communicate about Canadian history and Canadian, what Canada is these days, which seems to be, particularly under the previous government, pretty negative. But also the attachment, because this is a much more diverse crowd than the older crowd. These may be people who are immigrants who have come to the country fairly recently, or their parents came to the country fairly recently. So maybe their sense of attachment is a little bit less. But we've seen those numbers come down more recently as Trump has gotten more aggressive. But we should not take the unity in the future of this country for granted. We're going to have to fight for it.
Great. Excellent thoughts. Excellent closing thoughts. Thank you, Darrell, and appreciate your thoughts. Where can we go to follow your work and learn more about Ipsos?
Well, you can follow me on X at Darrell Bricker, but Ipsos is the third largest public opinion market research company around the world. Just go on Ipsos.com. Look at our news and polls, and you'll see everything that you need to know. By the way, not just about Canada. We're very, very active in the United States. We're very active all over the world. And so if you want to know what's going on in the UK, you want to know what's going on in France, you want to know what's going on in Italy, wherever you're interested in finding out what public opinion is, you should stop at Ipsos as your first point of call.
All right. We'll make a point to, we'll make an effort to put the link down below and follow Ipsos there. A lot of really good information if you want to get real-time data on public sentiment and opinions. Thank you so much, Darrell. Thank you for coming back on the show. We look forward to next time. Take care for now.
Pleasure. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe.